Hey everyone, Elizabeth here. The Last Laugh delivers stories that leave you speechless. If you're here for it, hit subscribe and let's go.
The text came the first week of November, which gave me exactly 6 weeks to decide what to do about it. It was from my brother Gerald. 7 words. Mom says you should sit this one out. I read it twice. Then I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter next to the woolen blanket I'd been folding. The one my mother had knitted for me decades ago, now moth-eaten at one corner, still warm, and I stood there for a moment in the quiet of my own kitchen and thought about what 41 years of showing up adds up to. It adds up, I'll tell you that. It adds up to a number that doesn't fit on a birthday card. I was 63 years old. I'd been attending the Vasquez family's second Saturday of December gathering since I was 22. I'd missed it twice. Once when my son Tomas was in the hospital at 8 months old with a fever that scared us both half to death, and once when my car died on the I-10 outside of Deming and I sat on the shoulder for 4 hours waiting for a tow. Both times my mother had called to register her disappointment. Both times I'd apologized. I'm not sure what I was apologizing for exactly. I'd gotten good at apologizing for things that weren't my fault. It's a skill you develop in certain families. Some things you practice until they feel like love. My name is Leonora Vasquez Whitfield, and I have been the quiet one in my family for as long as I can remember. Quiet is the wrong word, actually. I'm not quiet. Ask anyone at the Tucson Branch Library where I worked for 22 years. Ask my book group, the one that meets in Delia Okafor's living room on alternating Thursdays. Ask Tomas, who would tell you his mother has opinions about everything from sourdough hydration to city council candidates. What I mean is, I was quiet inside my family. I learned early that the space inside my family didn't have room for a second loud voice. My mother, Consuelo Vasquez, filled a room the way certain weather fills a sky, completely without apology, with no awareness of what it displaces. My father, Ernesto, had been a gentle man. He died when I was 47, a Tuesday in February, a small stroke after a long evening. I'd driven 3 hours to sit with him in the last week. My mother had been present and organizing. She organized the nurses. She organized the flowers. She organized who was allowed in the room and for how long, and she did it all with the efficient confidence of a woman who had been running things her entire life and saw no reason to stop at a deathbed. I don't say this cruelly. I say it because it's true and because it matters to what happened later. Gerald, my brother 4 years older, still living 12 minutes from my mother's house in Tucson, had always been the anointed one. Not because he was smarter or kinder or more capable, but because he was first and he was male and my mother had grown up in a house where that counted for everything. He ran a tile contracting business that did fine, not remarkable, and he spent the December gathering telling the same 3 stories about jobs he'd bid on and problems he'd solved, and everyone nodded as though the stories were new each year. His wife Patrice, brisk, thin-lipped, from a family that considered itself a cut above, had co-opted the December gathering somewhere around year 15. It was her tablecloths now. Her centerpiece. Her opinions about who sat where. My sister Renata was younger than me by 6 years, and she had the particular gift of people who have always been the baby. She could withdraw approval in an instant and restore it just as fast, and no one in the family had ever called her on it because the withdrawal was never quite dramatic enough to confront. She lived in Phoenix and worked in medical billing and had a habit of saying, "I'm just being honest," before saying something she knew would land. These were my people. And for 41 years, on the second Saturday of December, I brought a Pyrex dish of my mother's own tamale recipe to her house, set it on the counter in her kitchen with the avocado green tile that she'd never updated since 1978, poured myself a glass of whatever wine Gerald had opened, always the wrong kind, always too warm, and I sat in the family room while my mother held court and my brother repeated his stories and my sister Renata made small precise comments designed to remind me of my place in the family's internal accounting. The specific desire behind everything I'm about to tell you was a simple one. I wanted to host Christmas. Not the December gathering. That was always the second Saturday, different from Christmas Day. I mean the actual holiday. I'd been asking to host for 11 years. 11 years of we'll see, and maybe next year, and it's just easier at Mom's. My house was bigger than my mother's. My kitchen, which I'd renovated in 2019 with the small inheritance from my father's brother, had a 6-burner stove and a double oven and a kitchen island that could seat 4 people. I could feed 20 without borrowing chairs. My mother had never once said yes. Gerald's text arrived on a Tuesday. I sat with it for 3 days before I called him. What does that mean exactly? I said. Sit this one out. He paused. There was the sound of a truck backing up somewhere near him. He was always at a job site when I called or claimed to be. Leo. Mom's just tired this year. She doesn't want any. He stopped. Any what? Tension, he said. You know how things get. I did know how things got. Things got tense when I suggested something that my mother hadn't decided first. Things got tense when I arrived and my food was received with a particular silence. Not ingratitude, just a studied neutral reception that somehow communicated more than rejection would have. Things got tense when I asked, in year 3 and again in year 7 and again in year 11, whether I could host Christmas at my own house, and my mother said, we'll see, while Renata and Gerald exchanged a look they thought I couldn't read. What tension? I said. Leo. Tell me what tension. Specifically. He didn't have a specific. He never did. Vague is easier to defend. 3 days later Renata called. She had a way of calling that felt like she was confirming something already decided, not initiating a conversation. We just think, she said, it would be better. This year. For everyone. Better how? Mom's having some knee pain. She doesn't want to manage a full group. I could host, I said. The silence that followed had its own particular quality. Not surprise. More like the sound a door makes when it's being held shut from the other side. It's just easier at Mom's, Renata said. You know how she is. I did. I did know how she was. I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a while. The marigold pots on my back porch were past their season, dry-stemmed and finished, and I looked at them through the window the way you look at something when you're thinking about something else. The brass candlesticks from the wedding. Mine from my marriage to Frank, who had been a kind man and a patient one, dead 6 years now from a cancer that moved faster than any of us were ready for, sat on the kitchen island in the afternoon light. That was the day I went looking through my father's cedar box. I want to be careful here about what I say because I don't want to overstate it. My father had left me the cedar box. Not Gerald, not Renata. Me. He'd said so in a handwritten note that his attorney, a woman named Carly Mendez who sent one-line emails and signed them with a single C, had delivered with the rest of the estate documents. The box sat in my bedroom closet for 6 years after he died. I'd opened it twice. Once to look, once to put the note back. It felt too large to go through alone. But I went through it that November evening, sitting on my bedroom floor with the cedar box in my lap and a cup of Earl Grey from the green tin going cold on the nightstand beside me. Most of it was what you'd expect. Letters from my father's time in the army. A small photograph of his parents in front of a house I didn't recognize. His father's watch. A religious medal on a thin chain. At the bottom, in an envelope with my name written in my father's handwriting. Not Leonora, which he used when he was being serious, but Leo, which was what he called me the rest of the time. There was a letter. He'd written it in 2009, 4 years before he died. The paper was thin and his handwriting had already begun to loosen at the edges. Leo, it began. The December gathering was your grandmother's. Not your mother's. Abuela Carmen started it in 1962 in the house on Mesquite Street and she ran it until she died and your mother took it over and changed what it was. Your grandmother made it for whoever needed somewhere to go. Your mother made it for the family only. I want you to know the difference because I think you already feel it. The tradition belongs to whoever keeps its spirit. You always kept its spirit. Love it. I read it 3 times. Then I put it back in the envelope, put the envelope in the cedar box, put the box back in the closet and went to the kitchen to make dinner. I didn't decide anything that night. But something in me had already decided. The second Saturday of December had always been my grandmother's day and now I knew it. I spent the first 2 weeks of November in a kind of slow, private reckoning. I want to be honest about that. It wasn't decisive or clean. It was messy in the way that most real things are messy. I'd go 4 days feeling clear and then wake up at 3 a.m. doubting myself, lying in the dark in the house that was mine, listening to the neighborhood settle. What I was afraid of wasn't conflict. I'd had 41 years of low-grade conflict and I knew what it felt like. What I was afraid of was the thing underneath conflict. The permanent alteration of something. The way a family can absorb a rebellion and then close back around it like water so that nothing is actually different and you've paid the full cost of dissent for 0 result. I'd seen that happen. I'd done that to myself more than once. The vulnerability moment came on a Wednesday evening in the 3rd week of November. I was setting out placemats for a dinner I was cooking for no one but myself, and I stopped with a blue cotton placemat in each hand and I just stopped. I put them down on the kitchen island and I sat on the floor, the way you sit on the floor when you're not planning to sit on the floor, with my back against the lower cabinet and the placemat still in my hands. I sat there for a while. What if I do this and nothing changes? That was the thought. Not the event itself, not the gathering, not the door, not the street full of neighbors, but the aftermath. What if I open my door and people come and it's a good day and then in January my mother calls and Gerald calls and Renata calls and everything just continues, slightly colder, and I've spent something I can't get back and the family is exactly the same and I am 63 years old and there are fewer Decembers ahead than behind and this is what I spend one of them on. I sat on the floor for 11 minutes. I know because the oven timer went off at the 11-minute mark and I had to get up. I got up. I pulled the dance casserole dish out of the oven. I set it on the trivet that had been on my counter since Frank and I were first married, turquoise and chipped at one corner, and I stood there in the steam from whatever I'd made, some bean thing I honestly don't remember, and I thought about my grandmother. What I know about Abuela Carmen I know secondhand. He died when I was 4. I know her from photographs and from what my father told me, which was that she was a woman who understood that generosity was not a personality trait, it was a practice, and that a practice was something you did even when you didn't feel like it, especially then. I know that the December gathering on Mesquite Street had 30, sometimes 40 people. I know that she made food for whoever showed up, and she didn't keep a list of who was and wasn't allowed. I know that my father thought I kept that spirit. I decided that night. Not dramatically. I didn't write a list or make any calls. I just decided, the way you decide something that's been decided for a while already and you're only now catching up to it. The second Saturday of December. My house. My door open at 10 a.m. My son Tomas is 38 years old and looks so much like his father that it still catches me sometimes. The set of his jaw, the way he holds a coffee cup in 2 hands. He lives 20 minutes from me, works in water infrastructure for the city, and has the quality of a person who listens before he speaks. His father was the same way. I married well in that regard. I called him on a Sunday afternoon in late November. I told him what I was doing. I told him about Gerald's text. I told him about the letter in the cedar box. He was quiet for a moment. "Grandma's going to call me," he said. "Probably. What should I tell her?" "The truth," I said. "Tell her you're coming to my house." Another pause. "How many tamales are we talking?" 4 dozen. "I'll bring Yolanda and the kids," he said. "And I'll bring the card table for the driveway." That was all. He didn't make it bigger than it was. He just committed to it. The following Saturday I went to Delia Okafor's house for book group. Delia is 61 and teaches 3rd grade and makes a sweet potato soup that I have requested the recipe for 7 times and she has refused to give me, saying the refusal is what makes it special. She has twin daughters, Adiz and Chioma, who are in their late 20s and drop in and out of book group with the easy confidence of women who know they're always welcome. I told Delia what I was doing. I didn't make a speech. I just said I was opening my door on the second Saturday of December and I hoped she'd come. She looked at me across the kitchen island with the mason jar of buttons her own grandmother had left her. Delia keeps it on the windowsill, says it's the best paperweight she owns, and said, "What time?" 10, I said. "I'll bring the soup," she said. I almost cried right there in Delia's kitchen. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. The Nguyen's across the street, Henry and Lone, who have lived there for 19 years and once shoveled my driveway after a surgery without being asked, I invited on a Wednesday morning over the fence. Lone said she'd bring her mother. Her mother was 84 and did not speak much English and made a rice dish I couldn't name and couldn't stop eating. I said wonderful. I meant it. Old Mr. Petrov, my neighbor to the north, who was 81 and walked his old beagle Max at 7 a.m. and 4 p.m. with the regularity of a man who had decided that regularity was its own kind of virtue. I knocked on his door on a Thursday. He stood in the doorway in a cardigan the color of old mustard and listened to me explain, and then he said, "My daughter is visiting from Flagstaff." "Bring her," I said. He nodded once. Like a man confirming a business agreement. I did not call my mother. I did not call Gerald. I did not call Renata. I had made my plan and I was living in it now. The second Saturday of December came in that particular way winter Saturdays arrive in Tucson, clear and cold in the morning, the sky a blue so clean it looked polished, with warmth that would come later in the day but hadn't arrived yet. I was up at 5:30. The tamales had been done the night before, all 47 of them. I'd made 3 extra because Tomas had called on Thursday to say his colleague Roll was asking to come, wrapped in their corn husks and ready in the big roaster, the one I'd bought 20 years ago for a Thanksgiving I'd wanted to host and had been talked out of. I put the marigold pots back on the back porch the night before. They were still dry-stemmed, but I'd tied small ribbons at the base of each one. A thing I'd seen my grandmother do in a photograph, a thing I'd never done until now. By 9:45, the kitchen smelled the way a kitchen should smell on the second Saturday of December. Tomas arrived at 9:50 with Yolanda and their 2 kids, and he carried the folding card table to the driveway without being asked, and Yolanda set a oilcloth tablecloth on it in red and gold, and the kids, 7 and 9, immediately began treating the driveway as their territory, which I found entirely correct. Delia arrived at 10 past 10 with her sweet potato soup in the Dansk pot she'd brought, and behind her came Adiz and Chioma. Adiz with a pan of something cornbread adjacent and Chioma with 2 bottles of sparkling cider. Lone Ingwin came at 10:15 with her husband Henry and her mother, Mrs. Tran, who wore a coat with a fur collar and carried a dish covered in foil with both hands. Mr. Petrov arrived at 10:22 with his daughter. Her name was Nadia, she was in her mid-50s, she had her father's eyes, and he handed me a tin of cookies without explanation, which I accepted without asking. By 11, Raul was there with his wife Guadalupe. By 11:15, the Okafor girls had put on music from Chioma's phone. By 11:30, Henry Ingwin and Tomas had moved the card table to the driveway's edge to make room for the neighbors who kept appearing. The Garcias from 4 houses down, Beverly Park from the corner, the Castellano family who I'd waved at for 12 years without ever having a real conversation with. At some point, I think it was around noon, the street was just full. Not in a chaotic way. In the way of a thing that has enough room. My mother called at 1:07 p.m. I was standing in the kitchen doorway looking at my driveway and the rim of my front yard and a portion of the street that had become, without anyone exactly deciding it, the place everyone was standing. I felt my phone vibrate in my apron pocket. I looked at the screen. I let it ring. A person who keeps a tradition doesn't always look the way you expect them to. Tomas was at the card table showing Mrs. Tran's dish to anyone who walked past, because it was extraordinary. I still don't know what it was, some layered rice thing with herbs that tasted like the first warm day of spring. And Mrs. Tran was standing next to him looking pleased in the precise way an 84-year-old woman looks pleased when people are eating her food. Delia was at the back near the marigold pots talking to Nadia Petrov about something that made them both laugh. A real laugh, the kind that makes your head drop back. Mr. Petrov's old beagle Max had fallen asleep on the bottom porch step. Gerald called at 1:43 p.m. I didn't pick up. Renata texted at 2:11 p.m. Where are you? Mom is upset. I looked at the text. I looked up at my driveway. I put the phone back in my apron pocket. Tomas found me in the kitchen at around 3, where I was refilling the serving dish. There were 7 tamales left out of 47, which I considered a significant data point. He stood in the doorway with a cup of something warm and looked at me with his father's particular expression of careful attention. They called you, he said. Several times. He nodded. He didn't ask what I'd said. He knew I hadn't said anything. Roll's wife wants your tamale recipe, he said. Tell her I'll write it out. He turned to go then stopped. Dad would have liked today. I thought about Frank standing in this kitchen the way he'd stood in it for 24 years, the way he always found a task when there were people around, washing a dish, refilling a glass, something with his hands, so that hospitality looked effortless. He would have been very good at today. Yeah, I said. He would have. The guests began to leave around 4 when the light began its winter shift, that long gold-going amber that Tucson does in December, so slow and specific it feels deliberate. Mr. Petrov left first, Max on the leash, tin of cookies long gone, with a nod that was almost a bow. The Nguyen's left with Mrs. Tran's empty dish, which she pressed back into Lone's hands with instructions in Vietnamese that Lone translated as, she says bring it to her next time. Delia left last, standing on my porch in her coat. Same day next year, she said. Same day, I said. She drove away in her car, a deep blue Volvo with a bumper sticker from the library system, faded now, and I stood on the porch in the fading light until the street was quiet and mine again. The consequence cascade didn't arrive all at once. It arrived the way most things do, in stages with pauses in between. My mother called again on the evening of that Saturday. I answered that time. We waited an extra 40 minutes, she said. Her voice had the particular quality of someone who is not quite accusing but wants you to know the accusation is available if needed. I know, I said. Gerald checked your street. He said there were cars. There were. Buzz. You hosted something. I opened my door, I said. People came. She didn't say anything for a moment. I'd learned over 63 years that my mother's silences were not the same as each other. This one had a quality I didn't have a name for yet. It wasn't your place, she finally said. The tradition was Abuela Carmen's, I said. I read Dad's letter. Another silence. Longer. That letter wasn't meant for anyone else, she said, which was a particular kind of statement, not a denial which told me she knew exactly which letter. He left it to me, I said. She hung up. Not dramatically. Just with finality. Gerald called 3 days later on a Tuesday at noon. He was conciliatory in his way, which meant he was doing the thing where he presents himself as reasonable while delivering the family's position. He said Mom was hurt. He said everyone was confused. He said, did I really need to do things this way? What way? I said. Making it a whole production, he said. Inviting the neighborhood. Grandma Carmen invited the neighborhood, I said. He paused. That was different. How? He didn't have an answer. He had the position but not the argument. Gerald, I said. I love you. I'm going to do this every year. You're welcome to come. He didn't come that year. But he called me in February and the call was different. Shorter, warmer, less position-taking, and I think something had shifted though I couldn't say exactly what. Renata, true to form, said nothing for 6 weeks and then sent a text in late January. Patrice's daughter told her there were like 30 people at your thing. Sounds nice. I wrote back, come next year. She didn't respond. But she also didn't say no. What I heard through other channels, through Tomas who had crossed paths with Gerald's son at a gym they both used, was that my mother's December gathering that year had 9 people and that she'd run out of food which had never happened before, because 6 of the cousins who usually came had other plans. I don't know what those other plans were. I didn't ask. I'm not going to say that fact made me feel nothing because it didn't. But I'm also not going to say it made me feel satisfied, because satisfaction isn't quite right either. The word I keep coming back to is clarifying. Things clarified. The second Saturday of December comes around again and again. That's the thing about traditions. The calendar doesn't care who's arguing about them. It just comes back. By the following November I'd started keeping a recipe notebook. Not a printed one, not a document. A physical notebook, blue cloth cover, the kind you find in school supply sections. I'd been writing down recipes I'd gotten from people. Mrs. Tran's rice dish, which Lone had finally translated into rough measurements. Delia's sweet potato soup, which Delia had finally, grudgingly, given me a version of. The version I'm willing to release, she said. Guadalupe's recipe for a chocolate tamale I'd been thinking about since December. Some traditions you inherit. Some you build from scratch, one dish at a time. My mother and I found a kind of accommodation in the year that followed. Not a reconciliation exactly, not a full clearing of the air, but a quieter version of the relationship we'd had. She called less often, but the calls she made were shorter and sometimes almost easy. She came to my house for Easter, which she had never done before. She sat at my kitchen island and ate the meal I'd made and didn't say anything about the 6-burner stove, which I chose to count as progress. Gerald came on the second Saturday of December that next year. He brought Patrice, who I suspect came out of curiosity and found herself by noon, helping Mrs. Tran serve her rice dish to people she'd never met, which I thought was the best possible outcome for everyone. Renata texted me on the morning of that 2nd December. Save me a tamale. I texted back a number that was not round. I told her I'd save her 4. She came. She stood in my kitchen in the afternoon in her coat, with a sparkling cider she'd brought without being asked, and she said, and I want to be precise here because I don't want to overstate what it was, you do this well. Not I'm sorry. Not you were right. Just you do this well. I'll take it. In a family like mine, you learn to take what's offered and not demand the form you wished it had arrived in. The maple in my front yard was bare by December. By the following April it had come back in that extravagant way maples do, overnight green like it had been practicing all winter. I'd planted it the spring after Frank died, when I needed something to do with my hands that would be there later. It was there. I have the cedar box on my dresser now. Not in the closet. On the dresser where I can see it. My father's letter is inside it, and beside the letter is the recipe notebook. And beside the notebook is the white porcelain mug with the chipped handle that Frank drank his coffee from every morning for 24 years. I don't drink from it. I just keep it there. Not every form of keeping is the same. What I know now at 64 is that a tradition belongs to whoever tends it. Not whoever claims it. Not whoever holds the date on the calendar. Not whoever has always done it this way. Whoever gets up on the cold Saturday morning and opens the door. I'm the one who opens the door.